What does it mean to you when someone says, that was the unthinkable? What does the unthinkable actually really mean when it comes to you? Is it being robbed of something? Time with someone? Maybe that special promotion that you busted your ass so hard for at work that was given freely to someone else? Could it be when someone comes along in your life and disrespects you? Well, today we're going to dive into a case that has not only the unthinkable, but the unimaginable and the inexcusable for Andy and his younger brother, Waylon. Today we visit a reality where monsters don't just hide in the closet or under our beds. For Waylon and Andy, their monster had a name: Dad. I'm Chelsea J. Welcome to Crime Light. I can be found on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and here on YouTube. I am working furiously in the next few months to become a partner here with YouTube, so if you hit that subscribe button and continue to tune in, it would be greatly appreciated, and I promise you dedication to videos weekly. Here on Crime Light, we don't just make content to be content creation. On my channel, I work intently with both news and true crime stories that have a takeaway with each story that I tell to help lower the crime rate, but overall stupidity in the world. So subscribe here today and definitely give the video a like if you felt like there was a good takeaway from your experience. Something terrible has happened to two children in this story, so I advise you to emotionally prepare. We're going to get into Andy's story, Waylon's story, and the description of their monstrous father. And as always, we will end with a powerful takeaway. Now, while we can't save them all, there still is something that we can be doing, and we will get into that as well. Now, you're probably thinking, oh my God, it has to do with children, and this just isn't my thing, or I can't stomach something like that. But before you click away from this channel or choose to change direction to a new podcast, just know I don't like talking about this stuff either. When it comes to the story of children being victims, it's not that I want to ignore it or put it on the back burner. It's just, I feel like you do. This is hard, but we can't just ignore it. Somewhere in the world right now, someone is getting hurt. Surely as we sit here and I speak, someone out there is being a victim of DV or child neglect. Like right now, someone's getting hurt. And the only time that we ever actually hear about it is when it finally goes too far and it makes headlines. But in year 2020, statistics would show 1,750 children died of abuse and neglect in the United States. Almost half the victims were younger than a 1-year-old. Almost 4 million children were involved in maltreatment investigations in 2020, according to data from the Department of Health and Human Services. Out of those investigations, more than 618,000 children were found to be victims of abuse or neglect. More than 77% of the perpetrators of the abuse are the parents of the victims. I'm going to go ahead and get into a story that had to do with two young boys. It's fresh in the headlines, and they were taken advantage of by their own father and without motive. Now, as difficult as it is to hear what I'm about to tell you, I'm going to do my best to honor and respect the audience and your feelings and your sensitivities with hearing different content such as this. This story all takes place in North Carolina. Now, if you have been tuning into my YouTube, you know by now that I'm not a big fan of the Carolinas. Ironically, my husband and I had thought about moving to the Carolinas at one point, and after I started looking into the crime rates out there and reading every other story in the headlines being from the Carolinas, I just realized this is not a movement that I'd like to be a part of. Seems like the energy out there like truly sucks. I've been working with YouTube for the last 6 months, and I tell you what, man, the Carolinas, there's a lot of crime going on out there. And if there's one thing that I can propose, I don't like your system. Please consider getting a stronger judical system. All that to say, all of this takes place in Moore County, North Carolina. Authorities in Greenboro, I hope I'm saying that right, Greenboro have charged 33-year-old Sterling Cummings in connection with the cardiac arrest death of his 3-month-old son Waylon in May of 2021. Sterling was caring for his 3-month-old son Waylon when Waylon became unresponsive, but a 911 call was only made after the baby's mother arrived home. So the story is this. Waylon's mother trusts dad, Sterling, and she says, hey, I'm gonna go to the grocery store. She makes baby Waylon a bottle. She sets it on the counter and she's like, Toodles. She goes off, runs her errand. When she comes back, she doesn't hear her baby, but she also notices that the bottle that she made before she left was still on the counter. So she asked her dumbass partner. Sterling tells her, well, I didn't hear anything. And then she goes in the bedroom to check on the baby, only to find that baby Waylon was unresponsive. At the time, a neighbor had attempted to revive baby Waylon by performing CPR before Waylon would make it to the hospital. But by the time that Waylon had made it to the hospital, he was pronounced deceased. The infant showed symptoms consistent with shaken baby syndrome, including a retinal hemorrhaging, and had an abnormal MRI that later succumbed to his injuries. And when Sterling was questioned by authorities, the inconsistencies in his stories made one thing very consistent about Sterling, that he was not telling the truth, and he was arrested. So his wife comes home from the grocery store, and she's like, what's going on? And he's like, I don't know. I haven't heard from the baby. And then he just starts changing his story like it's not really a big deal. I didn't take out the trash, Mom. It's not a big deal. I didn't do what you asked me to do, Mom. It's not a big deal. Like projecting lies. A massive liar. Do you think that he even cared for a second about anyone else but himself when he was getting questioned by law enforcement as to what had happened? I'll answer that. No, he did not. And get this. It's the second time Sterling had faced child abuse charges. And it gets twisted furthermore. This was with a whole new woman and an entirely different child. That's right. The first time this happened was not with baby Waylon. This was with his previous son, his older son, Andy, with an entirely different woman. Keep that in mind. This guy runs around and he starts new lives with different women and totally new children, like he's recycling his old life for a new life while he's carrying the same demon around with him, doing the same shit that got him in trouble with the law in the first place. So I can already tell you right now how crazy Sterling is. I can tell you there is something mentally off with this guy. This family took on Sterling's first biological child with special needs caused by Sterling. And it is said that they were absolutely pushing for a more harsh punishment to help the system along and keep other children and women safe so this wouldn't happen again. And they were completely appalled when he got off on a really easygoing plea deal the first time. They said, we knew that this was going to happen again. It was only a matter of time.
Back in 2012, Greensboro police were made aware of an incident in Southern Pines where the biological son of Cummings was shaken. The abuse left the child bedridden, permanently blind, and has cerebral palsy. Police charged Cummings with felony child abuse, inflicting serious injury. That child survived and went into foster care. The couple who adopted the child was in court today.
And now here we are 11 years later, and with a dead child, and that just makes me profoundly sad. I don't feel that justice was properly served in his case. I don't want to take away from what happened to this other family, and I can't even imagine what they're having to go through. But you know what? I refuse while I'm still alive to not fight for Andy, because someone has to.
These people are angels. I hope when they get to heaven at the end of their life here on earth for what they've done for Andy and what they're doing for other people as we speak, that they get the biggest crown in heaven that could possibly be awarded to a soul. I hope that God just takes them in and just crowns the hell out of them and has this amazingly special place in heaven for what they're doing. Imagine spending the rest of your life committed to a special needs child, like really special needs. And they're like, was there ever a question about it? They didn't even think about it. They're like, this is our calling. We knew what we had to do with Andy. If not us, then who? And you know what, guys? I hear that Andy is an amazing child. Andy is an amazing person. I said it. Person. He's a person. He is his sister's angel. He is said to be an absolute gift to these people. He has given them purpose, and he just loves. He's just a good kid, and he embraces his disability because he only knows love now. These people took on something that they were called to do. They were not responsible to do it. They didn't have this child biologically. They took it on by choice, but they're saying that they knew it was in their heart that they had no choice. This was their calling. They took an evil movement from an evil man and they put it on their shoulders as a responsibility for the rest of their lives. And they said, you know what? No, This kind of behavior with this guy, with people like this, stops with us. It stops right here. We're gonna love this child. Let's get into the takeaway here. So I have questions. What story did Sterling feed the mother of Waylon in order for her to decide it was a decent and good idea to live a life with this man, engage romantically with this man, and to have a child with this man? I look at this guy and I just see these empty eyes. He's got eyes, they're just empty. He's not a bad looking guy, but he's got something wrong with him just looking at him straight up in the photo. Like when I saw him, I already went to this place in my head with the crime that he committed and the character that he has and just the appearance of the darkness in his eyes and his mugshot. And I was thinking that maybe he was like real redneck. Maybe him and the partner that he was with, Waylon's mother, were like on this kind of abandoned dirt road with maybe like a rickety shed for a house, and she's all sharing her life with this mutt. And I looked on the news and I saw that this was definitely not what I expected. When the news comes on and you see the house that they were living in, man, they had it going on. They drove like a nice car. They lived in a clean neighborhood. They had a really kind of bougier setup than I anticipated. So this guy got his foot in the door with someone decent. So what story did he tell her to get his foot in the door to get in that position with a woman that's willing to have his baby? The next question that I have, did she know about Andy, or was it simply a closed adoption and he chose not to disclose this information? Did she learn about it later than sooner when it was on the news? Did she realize the guy that she was living with had a record? You know, within the last 2 years between Andy and Waylon, between those two child DV incidences, there was a DV incident with an entirely different woman prior to that. He banged up someone pretty darn good. The news is saying that they're not 100% sure if he had any prior convictions other than what's come out already, and I'm here to tell you that he probably does. He most likely has prior convictions. Let's not remain naive here. Look, don't be afraid ever or ashamed out of ever doing a background check on someone that you're inviting into your life, especially if someone's pressing for you to settle down and have children with you. If it's fresh out the gate, and even if you get so much as a hunch that something's off, which I have a hard time thinking that this relationship was a good and healthy relationship. So there were probably a lot of flags and signs waving in her face that she just didn't see, and that's really typical in a toxic relationship. But how could she have consented to do this with Sterling if she had any inkling on the story about Andy? How can you do that? If someone's pushing to marry you or have children with you and things are toxic, really, seriously, don't be afraid to run a background check on the person. This happened to me one time in my life. I'm gonna tell you the story right now. I almost married a guy that sold me a story about his previous marriage. Personal story short, I ended up walking into the courthouse about 1.5 years into that relationship in his hometown. I asked for his file. Guess what I found in it? A restraining order, police reports. His ex-wife filed for divorce. You have no idea the shock that was for me. The entire time I was told that she was a crazy one. And divorce is so common that I personally just believed the guy. I wanted to believe him. I chose to believe him. And so when I learned of his record, I didn't know really who to be more pissed off with, like him or myself, because I had a choice at any point in time to follow my gut. And like I said, in a toxic relationship, there's going to be plenty of signs for you. And this is not textbook. I lived this nightmare, so I know from personal experience what the red flags are. I'm having a hard time thinking that Waylon's mom didn't see the signs, because he did carry this and it was repetitive. But she can't blame herself, and it's not her fault. However, the system of North Carolina failed this family. He failed this family. So if you ever have an inkling that someone that you're romantically involved with might have a secret, you have every right to look up their record, and I highly advise that you do. You can go into the court of the person where some kind of crime or divorce or something legal has happened, and you can request their file in the courthouse. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough, counties release that information online. All you do is type in the name and boom. And if you're trying to like obtain the records, then you just pay a small fee and they'll email it over. You can also request those records from the county that they're from. Except here in California, California, the world is going a bit haywire. Unfortunately, it's not just in North Carolina that the judicial system fails. We happen to have Government Newsom, who just signed the bill SB 73. This will automatically seal conviction and arrest records for most ex-offenders not convicted of another felony for 4 years after the completion of their sentences and any parole or probation. Under the law, arrest records that do not result in convictions would also be sealed. So I poke fun at the Carolinas, but there's a lot of things that are happening here in my state too that are just wow. I mean, may God be with you for potential future employers or maybe even people that you are dating. You know, I personally felt like our rights were stripped when I read about that. I was worried. I am worried. But let's say that happens, right? It happens, the world goes crazy and they're taking away opportunity for you to look up somebody's convictions or records or background. Sometimes these background checks are a little wonky. That's okay. Go find their ex, hit them up and ask questions. Don't be ashamed. We're not in the world where this is just my business anymore. Crime is off the hook. You have to protect yourself and your children, especially if you're vulnerable. You're coming from a place of owning a home, having money in the bank. You built yourself up. Those are the kind of people that these guys or even these females chase. They're not dumb. They have an agenda. This guy, Sterling, was living in a pretty nice little house with Waylon's mom. And he was just thinking he was gonna, sweep what happened with Andy under the rug and he was gonna be able to start completely over. But he's crazy. And crazy doesn't have a reset button, you guys. That's true grind. That's healing. That's turning yourself in. That's getting to know God. That's hitting rock bottom and realizing that you can't do this alone. This guy was ignorant. He's a nut job. My ultimate opinion is the judicial system failed Waylon and Andy. He was off to a wicked sick plea deal with Andy. He barely spent any time at all. He was free, and I've cried a lot on this story in private. It's been a hard one. I finally have the courage to talk about it. I feel like the system failed big time. When the judicial system fails us, we have to have our own backs. And sometimes they do fail us. Sometimes not everybody's perfect, but it's hard to have faith in the system for that purpose. But that's what our lives depend on. So if not them, then we have to know what to do. So again, don't be afraid to ask around or look around and check on your life because sometimes you're all you've got. Worse, your children depend on you and you're all they've got too. If you see anything concerning when it comes to regarding a child, take immediate action. Call CPS, call hotlines, bring it to somebody's attention immediately. We don't live in a hush-hush world anymore. Everybody's coming out about their differences and being open and utilizing that First Amendment right. You have the right to use your voice too. Don't be silenced because it's someone else's family and it's none of your business. You have an inkling that something's wrong, it's definitely your business. And more than that, it's your responsibility. So I'm gonna leave the links to the hotlines down below, especially if it ever has to do with children. Just so you know, anytime that you make a call to CPS, they absolutely legally have to investigate every single call that's ever made. So you do that as many times as you need to. It's your right. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. I'm sorry it was under such crappy circumstances. The takeaway was rough, but I'm glad that we could expose this evil monster and that we can learn from this in the best way that we know how. Bringing awareness means that we can change it for the future, or maybe we can do something differently. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. I love you guys. Thank you. And I will see you next week for another video. Crime Light out.